The reason the Hiss case sent the establishment right up the wall was that up to that time, those that talked about communism in America were considered to be nuts or demagogues or worse. There were several reasons for that. They said first that as far as Hiss was concerned, that he was probably telling the truth, that he was not a communist, even after the evidence became overwhelming that he was, or at least that he had served the communist purpose. Second, there were those that said, well, even though he might have been a communist and turned over papers, secret papers, documents and so forth, as he did in great volume to communist espionage agents, it didn't make any difference because, one, the papers weren't important, even though they weren't declassified, even at the point that 10 years later. Or second, and this was really distorted reasoning, because the Soviet Union had been our ally. They overlooked the point that Hiss remained a communist at the time that Chambers left the Communist Party during the period of Hitler-Stalin pact, when certainly you couldn't say that Stalin and communism was an ally of the United States. And then third, there was a deeper reason. It had to do with the fact that people thought that the Hiss case and the investigation of Hiss and his eventual conviction reflected on a whole generation of people that had supported the Roosevelt foreign policy. I never forget an evening in Washington when one of these Washington hostesses, not in the great tradition of Germaine de Stael and the others who had their salons back in the 19th century and the 18th century, who used to get people together for serious talk, but in the tradition of getting controversial people together in a room to see what fireworks would happen. But in this case, one of the guests was Paul Porter, a Washington lawyer, a very good lawyer, a Democrat, a liberal, and I was there with him. And the Hiss case, this is right after Hiss had admitted that he knew Chambers, after first denying that he had known him, and after the evidence was overwhelming that he was not only a communist, but had delivered papers to a communist espionage agent. And I remember Paul Porter got red in the face and he pounded the table. This is at the conclusion of dinner. He says, I don't give a damn if Hiss admits he was a communist or whether he was. These investigations are doing a great deal of damage to the country because they reflect on the Roosevelt foreign policy. Now that was simply ridiculous. I was a supporter of the Roosevelt foreign policy. I was a supporter of the Marshall Plan. I was supportive, this was later on, which was a continuation of the rest. I was a bipartisan supporter. But here it was, the attitude of this whole generation of people who had a vested interest in opposing anybody who was exposed to communism.